Hello everyone and welcome to the Tactical Mastery course. My name is Davorin Kuljasevic. I'm a Grandmaster from Croatia. And as the title of this course suggests, we will be studying how to get better at tactics, how to understand it better. Of course, the full mastery of tactics or any part of chess for that matter is not available to humans, but of course we can try to get better at it, learn better methods to improve this very important skill, and I'm hoping to be able to help you in doing that. Before we move on into some more practical things, let me just share with you what my motivation is for making this course. Because of course chess is a complex game and there is so many things to learn and cover, so many important topics. But you know, in my years as a chess player and especially as a chess coach, I've noticed that among the several very important fundamental skills, tactical skill is probably the key one. If one is able to master tactics as opposed to positional understanding or endgames or openings, it seems to translate to other parts of the game. So if you can learn tactics to a significantly high degree, everything else becomes easier. You know, it becomes easier to make plans, becomes easier to calculate in endgames, and so on. And of course, finally your results are better, which is probably the most important thing for all of us. My second motivation is actually to help you improve the tactical skill from another maybe point of view, compared to the usual, you know, do 1,000 tactical puzzles and you will get better. I'm actually trying to get at this from a more comprehensive angle, and you will see what I'm talking about very shortly. Before we move on to the specific examples, let's just share some definitions. I think it's good to start with definitions in the beginning. So what is tactics? What are tactics? Well, I like this definition by a Russian author named Lisitsyn. Maybe you're familiar with him, maybe not. He was a contemporary of some famous players like Botvinnik and so on. And Lisitsyn says that tactics teaches us how to successfully carry out a fighting operation of local significance and how to calculate it. In some cases, he says, tactics can have an independent significance which can define the outcome of the game. So in other words, tactics is usually something that happens in a very short amount of time compared to the whole game, and usually does not have a greater significance unless in some cases it decides the game. But most tactics throughout the game, they just happen and then they're gone. Now, opposed to tactics, you already know, is strategy. According to Lisitsyn, strategy is a part of the game that investigates issues such as organization of your forces, a choice of positional targets, build-up and implementation of the general plan. And he concludes that thereby, chess strategy often incorporates tactics, and with some exceptions, tactics are usually subordinated to strategy. And this is a well-known thing, and probably what your coach might have told you, you know, don't go fishing for tactics, have a plan, and then if the tactic comes up, you have to be able to execute it, of course, but it's not a good idea to just, you know, go for some tricks, things like that. So, with these definitions, let's move on to the specific example where we can see how tactics and strategy are interrelated. And this is the example right here on the board. Now, okay, I have the wrong position, so let me just back off. Let's move to the beginning. Okay, this is a position which is kind of famous. I mean, the structure here, it's called the hanging pawns. And it came from a game that I played recently against Israeli international master Tal Haimovic in Bill. So let's look at the position just broadly. We have the hanging pawn structure. What does black want to do usually in such structure? Well, he wants to push the d pawn, and then he can create some dangerous threats with his bishop on b7. There is also a pin along the e file, but it is white to move. So white now has a choice of moves how to deal with this threat. And here he has several moves. For example, okay, the move rook c1 that looks like an automatic move does not do anything about the threat. So black would simply just push the pawn, attack the knight, open his bishop, and basically he would take over the initiative, because then e3 pawn would be very weak. Maybe bishop f4 would come next. So let's come back. What about moving the queen? Maybe we can move the queen, for example, to f1. So now the queen is safe. But does it really stop d4? No, it doesn't. Black can still play d4. And after white takes, he has this intermediate capture. After he eliminates that knight, then he takes on d4. And the thing here is that, okay, white may be getting this pawn on d4, but some long-term problems will appear for white, especially on the king side. For example, after this sequence, black is just attacking. Just playing out, trying to checkmate white. On h2 or on g2. So this looks quite bad. And so I want to back off to the starting position, since we realize there are some bad moves here for white. The best move is actually bishop a6. Now, this is also, this is where we start our discussion of strategy and tactics. This is a strategically desirable move, because we know from experience that in positions with these hanging pawns, it is okay for white, usually it's good for him to trade pieces. Because the more pieces we trade, these pawns have less defenders. They cannot be defended by other pawns, only by pieces. So for white to trade these bishops, it's pretty good, because then the d5 pawn will be weaker. Now we are using some tactics as well. For example, we are using the principle of undefended piece. Bishop on b7 is undefended. So if black pushes the pawn forward, d4, we will capture his bishop. And we will win material. Also, black would like to keep his bishop, but it is pinned to the rook on c8. So, for example, if the rook was on b8, the best move for black would most likely be bishop a8 to keep the bishop. But as it is, white has used some small tactical motives to make a strategically desirable move. And black should exchange, whether he does it like this or as he did in the game. Either way, the position is still kind of tense. But now let's see what happened in the game. Queen takes b7, and what should white do now? d4 is still a threat. And white played queen b5. That's also a good move. In line with our strategic thinking. Let's trade more pieces, especially queens. And if he trades the queens, for example like this, this position will be, we can't call it an endgame yet, because there are so many pieces left on the board, but let's say all the endgames that happen later will be in white's favor, because of strong pressure against these pawns. So, what should black do? Well, Haimovic basically made the right decision. He didn't want to trade the queens, but he made it in a wrong tactical way. He allowed a tactical blunder. Now, the right move here, let's just point out, is knight b6. With this move, he avoids the queen trade and he protects the d5 pawn, which is quite vulnerable, and the game goes on. Okay, maybe white will be able to claim some small advantage, but that's all. But he played the move queen a8, and suddenly, we have some tactical ideas. So first of all, there is contact. This is a tactical idea we will talk about a bit later, with the knight on d7, and there is also a contact with the pawn on d5. And this knight on f6 protects both. So an experienced player will notice there is an overload. The knight on f6 is an overloaded pieces. It can't protect both the pawn and the knight. And the tactical shot is knight takes d5. We are deflecting the knight from f6, and we are taking that knight on d7, basically winning a pawn. What is even worse for black is that even after this, he's not just like a pawn down, but actually white continues the attack, because he has such powerful pieces like the bishop on b2, and black queen on a8 is very far away from the game, so the game ended quite quickly with checkmate, basically. But what I wanted to point out here is that white made some really good, let's come back to the start, good strategic decisions, like trading the bishops. And black also made the right strategic decision by avoiding to trade the queens, but he made it in the wrong way tactically. So this is what Lisitsyn was talking about. Yes, there is some long-term idea, long-term plan. I don't want to trade queens. It's not so good for me. But you always have to keep in mind these tactical details, these local operations. And just like for yourself, you also have to look for your opponent. So he missed the tactical detail that there would be an overload of the knight on f6. Now, I also want to share with you some misconceptions about tactics. I think that along with definitions, we also have to look at some misconceptions. So one of them is that people get too enthusiastic about learning tactics, and they say, oh, I will be a tactical master. I don't need to be good at strategy. I'll just play for these little tricks throughout the game and hope that my opponent will blunder. Okay, clearly that's a wrong approach. I don't encourage you to try to do that. On the other hand, we have this notion that, I'm not good at tactics, or your coach tells you you're not good at tactics, so avoid tactical positions. That's even worse, I think, because tactics is it happens everywhere, it happens out of the blue. For example, in this case, we saw that black was not even ready for this tactic on d5. So you cannot really anticipate tactics. It happens. And you have to learn how to be ready for it and how to execute it. So this notion that I will be just a positional player, I will play some closed systems and all that, it doesn't work. Position inevitably opens up, your opponent can create chaos, and you have to always be ready for that. The third notion is that, I've heard this from several sources, that studying tactics for 10 or 15 minutes a day will help you improve in this area. I don't think that works. Usually there should be some more time devoted to studying, especially if this is an area where you need to improve. 10 to 15 minutes a day, it's okay as a consistent habit, like if you do it consistently, but I would suggest if you really want to improve, try 1 hour a day. Fourth notion is kind of related to this, and it's a very popular notion that, solving a bunch of tactical puzzles over time will automatically improve your tactical skill. And it probably will to some degree. But I think what is very important to have in mind is that you need to also be able to recognize tactics as they happen in the game. And solving a bunch of tactical puzzles, it does help you to improve your pattern recognition. But what we will do in this course, we will focus more on understanding why tactics happen and how to recognize them. And I think that helps a lot in the practical sense. So this is for this part about definitions, misconceptions. Now I want to show you a few examples of why tactics are so important. And the next example might seem to you a bit funny, but let's look at it anyway. And I think it will be a good one, just to realize that there is no strategic mastery without tactical mastery. It's a game that's been played between two players rated around 1100. And the opening was good enough. Some Queen's Indian. And here immediately white played a strange move, e4. Was it a pawn sacrifice or a blunder? I'm inclined to believe it's the latter. And okay, with knight e5, black plays, instead of some normal move like bishop e7, he plays bishop b4. It's a typical blunder for young players of this level, so he misses the double attack. Okay, lost a piece, but he wins this pawn on d4. And now it's time for white to blunder. He plays rook d1, instead of just maybe taking on c6. But look at what black plays. He plays a5. So he's making a counter attack. That's typical beginner's thinking. If your opponent makes a threat, let's answer it with an equal threat. But actually, what if what if you just take the piece? You got your piece back. So that's a mistake. Now, after the exchange of queens, the knight is hanging, and it should move. Maybe we play knight b5 and we keep the extra piece. But again, white is thinking the same way. Let's answer a threat with an even stronger threat, or an even stronger move, which is a capture. So he captures on f6 without thinking ahead. And what happens after that is that two pieces are hanging. So black will basically get his piece back. And now there are also some extra pawn. There is one extra pawn for black, but the others are very weak for white, so this should be a winning position for black. However, white won this game. How did that happen? After some normal moves. In this position, black played knight take c4. And that's, again, a typical mistake for younger players, a lack of board vision. They just forget that this rook on h4 was still protecting the pawn on c4. Instead, maybe f5 would be just good enough to win the game. So after that, white won the piece and he won the game. Now what I'm trying to show with this game is that, for example, would it make sense to teach these two players how to make good plans, how to play very precise openings, to remember the theoretical endgames and so on? No, the first thing they have to learn is how to deal with tactics. Okay, they made so many blunders that they just need to practice this part of the game the most. So this is kind of like, it's like kind of having building a building that has shaky foundations. You can't do that. The building will fall apart when there is some, not even a tornado, but some, normal wind. Or it's like in martial arts. You can't get black belt without getting those lower belts first. So definitely, this is why it's important to learn tactics. It's the fundamental skill. Now, how to understand tactics, how to master it, so to speak. Well, you know, with this proliferance of specialized chess software, there are many sources to learn tactics, and they're usually classified by themes. So, you know, do a lot of pin exercises, trapping exercises, double attacks, and so on. And this is useful, as I said, for tactical pattern recognition. But it doesn't really help you understand why tactics happen. And I believe that's the fundamental step to mastering tactics, is to understand why it happens. It doesn't happen out of thin air. There are positions where it simply, you know, there is some specific reason why tactic occurs. And let's look at, for a change, at an example of two world champions in the World Championship match game. And this is probably one of the most famous mutual oversights in history of World Championships. So white is Anand. You might be familiar with this game. White is Carlsen, black is Anand. And in this position, which looks fairly quiet, Carlsen decides to bring his king to the king side. So it's kind of a strategic decision. Of course, your thinking would be, okay, my king will be maybe more useful on the king side because it protects the king side pawns. Or I will put it in the center on e2, where it will be kind of closer to the other pieces. And Carlsen played the move king d2, and he soon regretted it. He realized he made a blunder. But Anand didn't find the tactical shot that would probably win him the game. So what happens when the king comes on d2? This is what I said, by the way, earlier, that look, here the position where the king is on c1, it's not tactical at all. There is no tactics. But just one small change, the king comes on d2, and there is. Because it is more exposed here, we will talk about exposed king as one of the triggers a bit later. And there is a tactical shot, knight takes e5. It's a discovered attack on the rook. The knight cannot be taken because we lose the exchange, so we have to take. And then there is intermediate check number 1 and intermediate check number 2. This is the key move of the combination because the knight cannot be attacked. And black wins a clear pawn. He's a pawn up. And there are very big chances to win the game after that. I'm sure that Anand would have won it if he had found the move. But if we come back, we will see here that both players were so deeply involved in, with their strategic tasks that they just walked by this tactical opportunity. Anand played a4, and after king e2, Carlsen was relieved. His king reached its destination, and later on he won the game in a nice style. So I think this goes to show that even the strongest players, first of all, have not fully mastered tactics. And secondly, that tactics happen for a specific reason. So here the reason was that Carlsen put his king on d2. So there were some things like geometry, contact, exposed king, and so on that we will talk about later. They're the so-called tactical triggers. I can show you another very similar example that happened in my game. So I will flip the board. I was black playing against a young and promising Italian player, Francesco Sonis. And it looks like a very quiet position. Okay, black has a slight positional edge because he controls the d file. It's a close position where the bishop on a3 is really not that well placed. So it's a slight edge. And Sonis played this move king f3. Now, you already know the pattern from the previous game. The king moves forward and it's more exposed. And do you notice the winning, not the winning, but the tactic that would give black a huge advantage? Take some time, or pause the video. I will show it now. It is the move rook d4. The rook cannot be taken because of the geometry, another trigger. And what white can do, maybe he can protect one of his pawns on the 4th rank because they're really weak. And after that the rook comes on a perfect square c4, from which there are so many tactile threats that most likely black is just winning pawn. So my rook d4 move, by the way, I didn't see it in the game. Again, I was too involved in strategic tasks like whether I should trade the knight or not, which I did, but at the end this advantage was not enough to win. But coming back to rook d4, it is a tactical idea, of course, but it's also a strategic idea because the rook is perfect on the 4th rank. For example, on d8 it's not doing much, so I need some squares to infiltrate white's camp, and d4 is the right one. And I'm attacking all his pawns. And so what I want to say with this is that we also have to be aware of the goals of tactical operations, because sometimes it seems like a tactical operation is good and it kind of works, but what's your goal? If your goal is to win a pawn, but after that you get checkmated, it's not good. Or if my goal was to play rook d4 here, just for the sake of making a threat, and he just moves his king, let's say, to g3, and I have to retreat, then it's a bad combination, it's a bad tactic. But if he plays king g3 here, I have a nice move, rook c4, or rook d3. So my goal of rook d4 was not just to play for tricks. I have a bigger goal in mind. So these are some of the things to keep in mind, tactical triggers and goals of tactical operations, and we will look at a few more things a bit later. So just quickly, I want to give you, just to tell you what are my goals for this tactical course, and also to give you an overview of what we will look later. So just to see the goals, the first one is to learn how to spot tactical opportunities based on specific triggers. Secondly, to learn how to think about tactics more comprehensively. Third, to learn techniques for improving visualization and board vision. These are two very important skills that help us in tactical execution that we will see later. And fourth, learn the structured way to calculate variations accurately. And this will be a whole, I will talk about this in the second part of the course. Basically it will have to do a lot with calculation. And there is a structured way to do it. It's a model that I have developed, and I'm hoping that you will find it useful for yourself. Now you should just bear in mind that these are all, as I said, tools for improvement. It's hard to understand all these complex things that happen in chess. But I want to help you on this path of better understanding, to achieve better skill and ultimately to have better results. And let's just see the overview of the course. So part 1, this will be in the next video. Part 1 is understanding tactics. This will be, we will start with why tactics happen. Second video will be goals of tactical operations. Then we move on tactical means, tactical motives or tactical devices. After that we are getting a little bit deeper. We are looking at these tactical triggers. First one of them are undefended pieces. The next one is contact, then chess geometry, then exposed king, and after that we will put it all together by looking at chess combinations. There are complexes of more than one tactical idea. The second part of the course will be how to improve tactical skills. So that's purely practical. Maybe the first part is more theoretical, second part more practical. So, as I said, board vision or board overview. Then we have calculation, the so-called ply theory. Also visualization. sounds similar to board vision, but actually it's not. It's like how well can you imagine a variation when you calculate, so to speak. So I mentioned calculation, ply theory. That's something probably completely new. We'll discuss candidate moves, opponent's counter chances, and deeper calculation. And we will see more practical material in the next video.